So welcome everyone to our our second evening with Dr. Alison Roy, who is here to work with us this evening on some trauma-informed practices. My name, for those of you that don't know me, is Heather Manchester. I'm the curriculum director for the Oxford Hills. I'm so glad to be here tonight with you. Just a few Zoom norms to keep in mind for this evening. We'd like it if you could keep your mic muted. If you want to turn off your video, it'll probably help with the quality of your experience. And then if you have a question, you're more than welcome to ask it. We'd just like you to enter it in the chat, and then we'll try to answer the questions at the end of the session or if there's a pause during the presentation. So while we are getting started, I would like to just welcome back Dr. Alison Roy, who's a clinical psychologist. She's worked with the Oxford Hills administration, faculty, and staff now for the past year and a half. Dr. Roy has a PhD in clinical psychology and has practiced in a variety of settings, including hospitals and schools, family therapy, and private practice. She's worked in the Czech Republic and in Singapore, and now she lives in New Hampshire, where she serves as a consulting psychologist with Dr. Cassie Yackley. So this is her second Zoom session with parents and families of the Oxford Hills. So for those of you who weren't here at the last Zoom, I just want you to know that our faculty and staff have been working with Dr. Roy in August as we ramped up for school this year. As you can imagine, it was a pretty big lift this year to get ready to come back to school during COVID. During this time with our staff and faculty, she encouraged us to think about going slow to go fast by putting relationships with our students as the first priority in welcoming to the school door. In order for students to be able to learn, they've got to feel safe and comfortable in our classroom. And we feel like the investment of time in building relationships with our kids will help them to learn better in the long run. Our work with Dr. Roy is so powerful that many of us who actually happen to be parents as well thought it would be good to share our learning with you all. So before Dr. Roy speaks, I do want to share a few other strategies we're using in our district to support students in building resilience. This year, we are supporting our students with a new social emotional curriculum called Second Step. We're now in our third month of implementation, and we have a social emotional learning committee that's supporting that work. It's been very good going so far. The teachers, for the most part, seem to be very pleased with the results. Kids are using the language and the words that they're teaching them, and they're seeing some transfer of those skills throughout their school day. At our high school, we'll be exploring curricula that supports our older students as well. We have a committee that's working at our high school building as well. I met with them this week, and they're quite keen to support our students also. So now I'm going to stop talking because you didn't come here to hear me talk. Dr. Roy is going to be talking with us tonight. Feel free to ask your questions in the chat. And at the end, I will be sending you a survey to get some feedback from you about the presentation today. So thank you. And Alison, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you so much. A great introduction. I'm really excited to be here. Hi, Mel. Mel's just popped on.
Oh, yeah.
So it's so good to see some familiar faces, but don't worry if you weren't here the first session. I do just a quick kind of reminder, even for people that were here the first time, it's always good to just kind of refresh where we're at and why we're talking about what we're talking about. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And it looks like I shared my audio as well, because that's going to be necessary for tonight. So the first night we got together, we really gave ourselves a foundation in the science behind stress, the neurobiology of stress, and how important it is, especially right now during this really unprecedented time, that we kind of understand our brains and bodies' reaction to the immense amount of stress that we're under right now, as parents, as professionals, as working parents, or just during this time, there's a lot going on. And so the first night, for those of you that attended, often feels kind of heavy. And I often feel like the bearer of bad news leaving night one, because I feel like I have to relay all this information. And I don't really give a whole lot of strategies walking away from night one. So night two feels really good for me, and I hope we share in that as well, because this is when we really start talking about, okay, we now know what happens when our brains and bodies are under this immense amount of stress, and how do we start to mitigate that? How do we start to make that better and help ourselves and the kiddos that are in our care? And so tonight it's all about that you are enough, and about the key role that relationships play in developing resiliency for our children and for ourselves as a human race. So again, here's some reminder slides just up front, just to get us a kind of a baseline of what we're talking about if we weren't here the first night, or just as a review. So, what we talked about the first night, again, is that neurobiology of stress and what really happens when our brain senses stress or overwhelming feelings, emotions, or events in our environment. What it does as a natural instinctual reaction. Now, this is something that the brain, the human brain and body, does on its own. Again, it's instinct, it's intuition. It's actually a pretty darn cool process. It's just not helpful if this process, this survival instinct, is happening in your day-to-day life. It's only really helpful or efficient if it's happening when you're actually in a life-threatening situation. So what happens when the amygdala, which is what I call the smoke detector of the brain, detects that something is scary or stressful in the environment? It kind of activates the brainstem area, or our survival brain, our reptilian brain, for action. It disengages the prefrontal cortex, or the higher order thinking part of our brain. That's the part of our brain that makes us human, that gives us all those really unique features of empathy, future planning, impulse control, all those parts of our human brain that are really higher order thinking parts. It shuts that down. So we're only operating out of that very basic reptilian brain. Our memory processes shift. This is why we don't remember things well. Details, language, of events that are really stressful. It's hard to remember those situations. And finally, it will disengage our social communication processes. So this is all what happens when we start to become stressed. And again, here's my favorite slide, right? I probably said that last time. This is my favorite slide to present because it really does sum up all this information on one slide. This is the polyvagal theory of the stress response system. And basically what it says, if we're able to stay in our optimal zone of arousal, that middle zone window of tolerance, we are able to be at rest and digest, meaning our body systems, our heart rate, our respiration, our blood pumping through our veins, our digestive system, they're all at rest and operating optimally. As soon as we start to become stressed, we regress back to that fear or survival brain, and we get pushed into that fight, flight, or freeze mode. Hyper arousal at the top of your screen is fight or flight. Hypo arousal is freeze. And again, all of these, kind of pathways, neuronal pathways, are really helpful if we're, for example, being chased by a bear. Not so helpful if we're trying to, be a parent or be a professional, or for your kiddos, if they're trying to be students in a classroom. This system isn't helpful if it's being activated over and over and over again due to chronic stress or stressors. So under stress, we certainly regress, and we regress back to that reptilian or survival brain. And it causes us to have, when we're in one of these hyper or hypo arousal zones, especially kiddos, we have really overt reactions to our environment because we think where our lives are being threatened. So we might become aggressive, physically or verbally. This is why sometimes you'll see when people become anxious, they actually become really angry. This is because of all these chemicals and processes that are happening behind the scenes. The other way we might tend to go is to shut down, is to avoid, is to not engage in the experience or the emotions, not allow our emotions to kind of take place because we're avoiding them or stuffing them down. So this is what this is going to look like in real life, day after day after day. You can imagine the amount of impact that has on our brains and bodies. So under stress, we certainly regress.
So Alison,
yes.
Let's clarify something. So as a parent, yes, when your kid is having a temper tantrum, is that hyperarousal?
And yes, that's what it's going to look like.
Sometimes if they go into that shell, that's hypoarousal.
Yes. Exactly. So hyperarousal could look like a temper tantrum, or it could look like running away, and even hiding. And the hypoarousal would be more like kind of avoiding. Teenagers, you'll see them kind of be in their beds, pull their covers over their heads, pull themselves inside a hoodie sweatshirt. Or the other thing we see with hypoarousal is what we call robotic compliance. So they'll yes you to get you to go away, and that's the ultimate avoidance. It looks like they're agreeing, but they're actually just kind of yesing you to avoid interacting with the overwhelming feelings or emotions.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. That's perfect. So that's what it's going to look like for ourselves and for our kiddos. And you probably know what you look like, what your kind of presentation looks like in those zones. And again, like I said, the first night, some of us tend to be hyper or hypo-aroused people. We all have the ability to go one way or the other. In other words, we all have the ability to be hyper or hypo-aroused. Some of us just tend to go one way or the other. And you probably know which one you are, if you tend to become really over the top emotional when you're really stressed, or if you tend to shut down and avoid. So if this is what's going on, and for a lot of us, and for a lot of what I'm hearing in our community, my home community, our communities around us, is that people are feeling pretty overwhelmed and not really knowing how to help their family, themselves, and their family members. And so hopefully tonight we start to kind of pick away at some of the strategies or ways of being with one another that are going to be most helpful during these times. One thing I do want to say up front, I just got asked to kind of join a task force on the Seacoast area here of New Hampshire, where it was really made up of hospital directors, mental health clinicians, pediatricians, primary care doctors. And we're really just trying to figure out what more can we do during this time to support people, because so universally people are feeling pretty overwhelmed. And one of the reports I was hearing from pediatricians is parents coming to them and saying, I don't know if my child has anxiety or depression or whatever, or what are my next steps. And I will say that for some kiddos that might be going on. For a lot of us and for a lot of our kiddos, this is a very normal reaction to a very abnormal situation, if that makes sense. So a lot of what you're seeing that might be considered symptoms otherwise are actually just normal ways of dealing with what's happening in our environment and in our world right now. So how do we help? So social neuroscience is what we're going to talk about today, and how relationships really do shape the brain. Now, I recognize I'm a working parent myself. I have 3 little kiddos under the age of 7. And I know right now we're pretty darn sick of spending time together. We spend a lot of time together. So I don't want us to think right up front that I'm going to be like, we have to spend more time together. What I'm going to talk about tonight is based on this relationship you already have with the children in your care. And so it's more of a validation and reassurance that that's enough, that you are enough, just what you're doing right now. And we're going to see plenty of examples of this. So why we talk about this is because the first night, what we talked about really is, and I think Heather said this up front in a really beautiful way, is brains that feel unsafe are the ones that are going to produce symptoms. So brains that feel like they're not safe, like they're stressed, like they might be experiencing overwhelming feelings, are the ones that are going to produce the symptoms of hyper and hypoarousal. And if you think about relationships, a safe, connected, beautiful relationship with another human being is the ultimate mediator of fear. If you're in the presence of that connected relationship, it's far more likely that you're going to feel safe, that you're going to feel grounded, and that you're going to be able to calm that fear survival brain in order to be able to have access to your full integrated brain. So this relationship with the children in your care started at a very young age. So if you think about the in utero experience for babies, it's absolutely the ultimate regulatory experience. So they are, all their needs are being taken care of. They're being fed, they're being hydrated, they're even being regulated through rhythmic experiences, either through their mom walking or through her heart rate. And so we are hardwired to regulate in this way. In other words, we are hardwired to regulate with another human being in a very sensory, somatosensory, rhythmic way. So we're going to look how that continues after birth. So tonight is really about attachment, attunement, and co-regulation. So we're gonna really dive deep into those three words tonight. So attachment is all about the relationship between a dependent and their caregiver. So all species have this biological drive to survive, and surviving and protection are kind of equal in those ways. And we as humans are not meant to survive alone. We're flock creatures. So, we like to say with trauma-informed care that yes, there's fight, flight, or freeze, but there's a fourth F. There's flock. And so if our brain knows at a cellular level that there's another person or relationship out there that's going to keep us safe, we won't go to fight, flight, or freeze. We'll actually go to flock. We'll actually go to those in our tribe, in our flock, in our presence in order to help ourselves calm down before going to fight, flight, or freeze. So if you're able to have this attachment, with your child or with another person, you're able to start to use the process of attunement. And really what attunement is the ability to connect on a very deep level with another person through what we call mirror neurons. And we're going to look at those in just a minute. It's really about providing or having that secure base. So you're going to be providing that secure base for your child, for then they can go out and explore the world and feel like if this person is safe, i.e. my caregiver is safe, I can believe that the world is a safe place and that other people are going to take care of me as well. And so they are able to then stay regulated, not only in your presence, but they're able to kind of use that to then go and feel regulated with other humans in their environment. So the first thing we're going to watch tonight is a very healthy attachment and what happens when we are not attached or attuned. And we're going to kind of use this as an example. This is a movie. It's called Still Face. For those of you who haven't seen it before and are parents, it can be a little bit difficult to watch the first time. I will give that kind of disclaimer. When I watched it for the first time as a mom, it's a little bit hard to watch. It's a completely controlled situation and the mom and baby are just fine. And you'll see that at the end. So we're going to take a minute to watch this right now.
Babies this young
Sound okay?
are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. In the still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby who's about a year of age.
I'm my good girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yeah.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this. And then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, "Come on, why aren't we doing this?" Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it. They actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Okay. I'm here. And what are you doing? Oh, yes. Oh, what a big girl.
It's a little like the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that normal stuff that goes on, that we all do with our kids. The bad is when something bad happens, but the infant can overcome it. After all, when you stop the still face, the mother and the baby start to play again. The ugly is when you don't give the child any chance to get back to the good. There's no reparation, and they're stuck in that really ugly situation.
Okay, so I love showing this video, and I know that sounds strange to say because it's so powerful, because it really does demonstrate in a very short amount of time how incredibly powerful that relationship between mother and child, or caregiver and child, and this has been repeated with multi-genders of parents, how that relationship between caregiver and child is so powerful, both regulatory and dysregulating, right? You can see how quickly that child goes to a very dysregulated place when mom is not responding. So the other reason why I like showing this video is because mom's not negatively responding, mom's just not responding. And so you can see how quickly that happens. You as caregivers, I show it to caregivers because it shows how powerful that bond is between you and your child, and how much you can use that and rely on simply that relationship to help one another interact and calm down. The other piece of this that I really want to highlight is that last bit he talks about, and this quote is from Dan Siegel, who's a lovely I think he's a psychiatrist. He wrote, and I'm in my office, and of course I don't have his first book, but it's on a later slide. So the Whole Brain Child is Dan Siegel's book, lovely book, great book. And I'll have a slide of the picture of the cover. This is the follow-up version for adolescents called Brainstorm. But this quote is kind of talking about what that researcher is talking about at the end of that video. The gold is in the shadows, meaning the gold is really coming out of the bad part he's talking about, right? There's a good part where the infant is exploring, they're happy, they're engaged with their environment, with their caregiver. There's the bad part where something happens that's negative, but then there's that repair that happens after, right? The baby can come back to that mom and feel like they're heard or seen or validated. And then there's the ugly, where if that baby had no relationship to rely on, they would be left in that feeling of bad and that feeling of scary or fearful emotions. And so I want to pause here to kind of give a personal example of this, and just sometimes that we need to hear it. So there was one particular day where I was supposed to be doing a webinar at 1, and they shifted it to 2, and then they tried to shift it back to 1. And for those of you who have children or are doing remote learning or learning at home, you know how impossible it is. Your schedule kind of has to be your schedule at the beginning of the day. And so I, of course, my stress survival brain kicked in, and I was operating out of not my best parts of my brain. And one of my kiddos asked for something, and I yelled at them. And it wasn't anything to do with them, but here we are in the bad, right? Here, now we've had this bad engagement. And immediately after, I had to call Dr. Cassie Ackley, who's my boss, on the phone and say, there's no way I can do this webinar now today. And I said, and here's what just happened. And she said, and this is a great reminder, because even sometimes we need to be reminded, go do the repair, because the repair is just as, if not more important than the relationship itself. And so there's that gold in the shadows, and being able to have that repair and say you're sorry and come back and kind of pick apart that situation. So we talk about this because, yes, we want to have that good relationship and that give and take and that flow, that beautiful part we saw at the beginning. And it's okay if the bad happens sometimes. That coming back and doing that repair is just as regulating, just as important for your relationship with your child. So I promise we talk about these amazing little cells that we have in our brains called mirror neurons, and the important role they play in attunement. So they exist in the frontal lobe of our brain, and they really exist to help us resonate with other human beings at this incredible cellular level. And so this seems like, magic really, but it does happen, and we've all experienced it. So we're gonna watch again a quick video, and then we're gonna talk a little bit more about these mirror neurons.
In the last 10 years, there's been some very interesting developments in evolutionary biology, neurocognitive science, child development research, and many other fields, which is beginning to challenge some of these long-held shibboleths that we've had about human nature and the meaning of the human journey. But there is another frame of reference emerging in the sciences, which is quite interesting. It really challenges these assumptions. And with that, the institutions that we have created based on those assumptions, our educational institutions, our business practices, our governing institutions, etc. Let me take you back to the early 1990s, sleepy little laboratory in Parma, Italy, and scientists had a MRI brain scanning machine on a macaque monkey as the macaque monkey was trying to open up a nut. They wanted to see how the neurons would light up. So the monkey's trying to open up the nut, the neurons light up, and just by serendipity, and this is how science sometimes happens, a human being walked into the laboratory, I don't know if it was by mistake, and he was hungry, he saw the nuts and opened up one of the nuts and tried to crack it open. The macaque monkey was totally shocked because who was this invader in his laboratory? And he didn't move. He just gazed at this human trying to open up the nut, just like he had done a few seconds earlier. And then the scientist looked on the MRI brain scanner. The same exact neurons were lighting up when he observed the human being opening the nut as when the monkey opened the nut. And the scientists had not a clue as to what this was. They thought the MRI machine had broken. They then began to put MRI brain scanning machines on other primates, especially chimpanzees with our big neocortex. Then they went to humans. And what they found over and over again is something called mirror neurons. And that is that we are apparently soft-wired, some of the primates, all humans. We suspect elephants. We're not sure about dolphins and dogs. We've just begun. But all humans are soft-wired with mirror neurons so that if I'm observing you, your anger, your frustration, your sense of rejection, your joy, whatever it is, and I can feel what you're doing, the same neurons will light up in me as if I'm having that experience myself. Now, this isn't all that unusual. We know if a spider goes up someone's arm and I'm observing it going up your arm, I'm going to get a creepy feeling. We take this for granted, but we are actually soft-wired to actually experience another's plight as if we are experiencing ourselves. But mirror neurons are just the beginning of a whole range of research going on in neuropsychology and brain research and in child development that suggests that we are actually soft-wired not for aggression and violence and self-interest and utilitarianism, that we are actually soft-wired for sociability, attachment, as John Bowlby might have said, affection, companionship, and that the first drive is the drive to actually belong. It's an empathic drive.
We're going to get to empathy at the very end tonight, but mirror neurons are what is responsible for our ability to resonate with another. I thought the spider example is a great example of how powerful they are. If you see a spider crawling up someone else's arm, you get that creepy feeling as well. And they're responsible for so much more and so much more, deeper emotions than that. So they're responsible for imitation, for being able to kind of predict what another might do, or for to understand the intent of another person. And they're really responsible for this process of attunement or emotional resonance. And the reason this is so important is because this is what helps us to help our kiddos calm down and help them regulate, because that's how because they resonate with us. So what do mirror neurons do? They allow us to feel with another person, to really be able to do the ultimate process of creating this mindset map of me and you, or we. So you're able to create this vision or this mind map, this neuronal map of the relationship between you and I, between parent and child, caregiver and child, and what it feels like It's like to feel what I feel like on the inside and what it is like to be you or be you on the inside, and how those two align or match up. And again, this is all at a very, in a very brain science neuronal way. And we haven't known about this so long. If you hear that video, they say the 90s is when we really discovered mirror neurons completely by accident, actually. It's what allow us to feel with another and to fully understand another person. And finally, mirror neurons are responsible for this process of emotional contagion. So emotional contagion, it gets a bad rap, as you can see in the cartoon. The little dog's basically kind of dreading this bad emotional cloud coming his way. But emotional contagion is, or can be, a good thing as well. And so it really kind of comes down to what I'm feeling, how I'm regulating myself, and how that's impacting others around me. So some of the research that they've done on emotional contagion was done in schools. And what the researchers did is take a cheek swab of educators and the students' cortisol levels. And we know from the first time we met together that cortisol is one of those pesky stress hormones that gets released in large quantities when we're feeling really overwhelmed. And so the teachers that had a high cortisol level, their students also had a high cortisol level. The teachers that had a low cortisol level or low stress hormone level, their students also had a low stress hormone level. So researchers were able to blindly match teachers to their students based on cortisol levels alone. And what this tells us is if we're able to stay regulated, there's a far better chance that we're going to help those in our presence regulate as well. Now, as a parent or a caregiver, I don't know about you all, but when I'm stressed, when I'm not at my best, I know my kids start to escalate or get worked up or seemingly are more crazy, and then we kind of play off each other. And that's what's happening here. These are those mirror neurons at work. And so again, they can work for good or for evil. And so hopefully we can kind of convince them to work for good. So this slide really kind of sums up what we've been talking about so far tonight, and creating this safety in the relationships we're building with our children. So the first process is creating that attachment with them, and that starts at birth, or really in utero, as we saw, that attachment process of beginning to create that relationship. Attachments and healthy, secure attachments can be made throughout the lifespan. And so even if it's not, made at birth, that we as humans can learn how to securely attach to others throughout our lifespan. So really what attachment is you keep me safe and you help me to believe that others can be safe too. And so there's that kind of concept of you keep me safe, you help my fear brain to calm down, and therefore I believe that I can be out in the world and that others are going to help me feel that way as well. Not everything's not going to be overwhelming, everything's not going to be scary. If you are able to create this secure attachment, that then this attunement process through those mirror neurons can begin to take place. You see me, you understand me, and you help me to understand myself. This process is so important for our children, especially our adolescents and emerging adults, where they're really trying to figure themselves out. If they have that other person in their lives who can say this to them, either verbally or non-verbally, that I understand you, I get you, I'm going to be here no matter what, I'm not going to judge you for who you are, as you try to figure out that process for yourself. That really is that emotional resonance or that attunement. And finally, the final part about this is if you're able to attach and attune, you can begin to use one another in that relationship you have to co-regulate. You see or notice when I'm upset or distressed, and you help me to calm down. Most of the children that we have in our care right now are not able to self-regulate very well. We always want kiddos to be able to self-regulate, and they'll get there, certainly, but that's largely a kind of factor of the part of their brain that doesn't fully develop until they're 25 years old. And when they're really stressed and they're really regressing back into that survival brain, their ability to kind of pull themselves out isn't going to be there. It's going to get hard. The more stressed they are, the harder that becomes. And we even feel that as adults, that we even sometimes get to the spot where if we're really stressed, it's hard for us to regulate ourselves. We might need the help of someone else. And so that's really what this process is all about, is this co-regulation and the ability to emotionally resonate with someone on a level that then helps you to calm down yourself. And this is why our third session together, our next session together, will focus on how do we regulate? How do we do self-care and regulation for ourselves? And what does regulation really mean and look like? Because it's so important for us to stay regulated as caregivers. So just in this way, as you can probably imagine, if these mirror neurons are working so hard to help with this attachment, attunement, and co-regulation process, that mirror neurons speak in the language of nonverbal cues. And so we want to make sure we're really aware, as a step one, of our nonverbal cues, because even if we're not saying anything, our bodies might be talking to each other through these little neurons that we have. And so eye contact, facial expression, posture, gesture, timing of language, or timing of gesture, all of these factors go into the nonverbal cues that mirror neurons are picking up on. And so when we really think about everything that you're doing when you're interacting with your kiddos, to kind of think about all these different aspects and how that might be being read by their nonverbal, readers. Again, it doesn't mean, sometimes when I talk about this with caregivers, it feels like we then have to be perfect in the moment. Again, the gold is in the shadows. That's why I talk about that right up front, because even if we can't do this in the moment, we realize that something might have been perceived as threatening or not regulating to our kiddos. It's just as beneficial to then go and talk about it, or apologize, or revisit, and do that, what we call repair of the relationship. If you realize there's been a rupture, to then repair that relationship, and how powerful that can be. I actually hope that we only walk away tonight with a recognition of just being more aware of, in the moment, how this might be impacting all the members of our family. So, just a couple of kind of, straight up strategies as far as in the moment, and how we can help this process of co-regulation along. Counting to 5, really, as grown-ups, we're really terrible at taking a break before we engage with a really high stress situation. It's one of the hardest things to do is just to walk away and take 5, and we tell our kiddos to do it all the time. But it can be really beneficial to just, kind of refocus. Why am I so agitated in this moment? Is there something else going on for me? Trying to be self-reflective, even just for taking a minute to be self-reflective, and hopefully regulating a little bit ourselves. Reflect on the content of the message, reflecting on the behaviors or what's happening in the moment. And I'm going to give an example of what this looks like in real life in just a minute. So just saying, wow, you're feeling really overwhelmed right now, or you're having really big emotions right now. So just kind of almost reflecting back to them what they're putting out in the world. Not only does that help calm the fear of their fear brain, it also gives them emotional intelligence. It helps them to understand that this is how they're coming off in the world in that moment. Avoid being a detective, and we're going to see why that is in a minute. Using language and trying to figure out what's going on for a child. So saying things like, why did you do that, or what were you thinking, which are some of my favorite parental phrases in the moment. We're going to see why those aren't helpful, and they're really not going to be able to answer your questions, and we're going to see why that happens in our brains. So state the feelings behind the words. So try to make a guess. And I hear from parents or caregivers a lot, I don't want to guess wrong. It's okay if you guess wrong. If you think, wow, you seem really angry right now, and they're like, I'm not angry. It's okay that happens. Because then you have the ability to say, I'm sorry, I got that wrong. Let me know how you're feeling. And again, this process is really hard, and it takes a lot of time and energy and reflection in the moment. And if we can take a minute to do it, that this is going to be really healing during these times of incredible stress. So match the affect intensity, making sure you're not going over the top and just trying to meet them where they're at, and don't dismiss or deny. And that as parents is also really hard to do, to validate feelings even when they're not your truth, or you don't even think they're true at all. To recognize that that's their truth and that's their feelings in that moment. So I'm sorry you're feeling hurt, is validating their experience without necessarily agreeing with it. And so, it's all about having that ability to take their perspective and validate in that moment, even if it's, seemingly not the truth for you. And we're gonna watch a beautiful Brene Brown clip at the end where we will talk a little bit more about that concept of speaking their truth. So as promised, here's the one of my number one go-to parent resources that I would absolutely recommend. I know a lot of the staff of the Oxford Hills District have read this book, have done some discussions about this book. We've talked about it in a lot of the work I've done with them. So I may be biased, but I think it's a really great resource. And why is because it's really approachable, it's digestible, and it's quick. It's a quick read, and it really, you could read, so there's 12 strategies in the book. You could read a couple, and just then put it down and then revisit it later, or revisit some of your favorites. It's also available on Audible. I'm a big proponent of listening to things as well as having hard copies. And so, it's a pretty quick listen on Audible. But this is, the basis of this book is, how do we integrate our brain, both the upstairs and downstairs brain and the left and the right brain, to be operating out of our full integrated brain? So Dan Siegel talks about when we're really stressed, we not only regress back to our reptilian or downstairs brain is what he would call it, but we also shut down parts of our left brain. And so this is why when we use language like, what were you thinking, or why did you do that, that our kiddos are not going to be able to answer. So let's look at this a little bit more. So this integration of the upstairs and downstairs brain is one that we've talked about quite a bit already. And so this is when we talk about, well, we regress when we're stressed and we regress back to our survival brain. It means we're operating out of the downstairs part of our brain. And we really need to be able to use our relationship with our child to be able to connect with them and be able to operate, open, what he says is open the baby gate to the stairs, to the upstairs brain. And so the number one strategy he talks about is connect and redirect. And so make sure you're making that physical, emotional, affect connection with your child first, before you then do the redirection or the discussion about what just happened. And so this part's really important for me to talk about too, as far as trauma-informed care. Often when people first hear about what trauma-informed care is, they think there's no consequences or accountability, but actually that's a huge part of trauma-informed care. We just get there in a different way. So we get there by connection first, by calming that fear brain first, allowing someone to feel calm, cool, collected, and connected, and be able to use all parts of their brain before we then do the redirection, the lesson, the future consequences, the understanding of all that. And we know from what the work we did together last time, that all of those kind of things I just mentioned, as far as the redirection part, the learning from consequences, having empathy, being able to apologize or have impulse control or learn or think about future consequences, all of those things are housed in that upstairs brain. So if you don't do that connection first, you're not using that fully integrated brain, that none of the redirection is going to stick anyways. None of it's going to make sense. None of it's going to be accessible for your child, and they're not going to be able to make a difference the next time they go to do the same behavior. There's not going to be behavior change, in other words. And what really we're talking about right now is changing behaviors and changing how we're reacting and acting in our environment. So that's the upstairs and the downstairs brain integration that Dan Siegel talks about, that is absolutely doable through connection first. Even a hug. So we're talking a 20-second hug will absolutely help this redirection to happen, this connection and then redirection to happen. So we're going to see more about that part in our third session together. But just to give you an idea, 20-second hug of true connection release is all we need to release oxytocin, which is good feeling hormones or chemicals to kind of counteract all of those adrenaline and cortisol, those stress hormones that we're releasing into our body. So 20-second hug. The other thing that we'll talk about more next time is what kind of dose of regulation do you need to kind of counteract the dose of stress that you're receiving right now. And so the research will show, because sometimes I think parents get overwhelmed with how much am I going to have to spend time with, connecting with my child before I can redirect them. And I get it. There's only so much time in the day, especially if you have multiple children in your care. But what the research is showing is a 3-minute interaction with only 5 seconds of true connection is what we really need in order to help integrate the brain. So it's not even a 10 or 15-minute interaction. It's a 3-minute interaction. So again, it could be something as simple as walking over and putting your hand on your child's shoulder and saying, "Are you okay? I'm just checking in." That's your 3 seconds of true connection. It might be enough to help calm that stress brain of theirs and help integrate. So left and right brain integration, this one's particularly important when we're talking about being able to, kind of continue on that path of redirection and consequences. And this is why when I say, when you're listening and validating, that you can't jump right to what were you thinking or why did you do what you do, because they're not going to be able to access that part of their brain. So when we become stressed, the left side of our brain also gets shut down. So not only the top part of our brain, but the left side of our brain gets shut down. It's crazy that our brain just does this automatically, instinctually. So, the research that they've done with victims of trauma or traumatic events or stressful events is they've put them in fMRI machines, and they've read them scripts of their traumatic events. So for example, there was one woman who had a really tragic car accident, and she created a script or a story of what happened, and they read that back to her while she was in the fMRI machine and looked to see which parts of her brain were lighting up and active. And the research shows that the left side of the brain, where Wernicke's and Broca's areas are, where all the language areas of the brain are housed in the left side of the brain, were completely black, meaning they weren't lighting up at all. There was no amount of activity happening there. So what that tells us is when we're stressed, we don't have access to the left side of our brain. And the left side of the brain is responsible for things like language, certainly, linear thought processes, logic, it's all the L's, lists, anything logical and linear and language is housed in the left side of the brain. So what you're left with is the right side of the brain being very, very active when you're stressed out, which is responsible for emotions and for big feelings, and reactions, but not a lot of rational thought. And so the other thing that connection or using your relationship with your child first will help to do is get that left side of the brain online so that they can then begin to use their language and with your help, identify what was going on, what was happening in those moments, and how to then move forward. So I promised a real life example of this, kind of in my own life. So, and this is fresh. This is just Halloween. And this is just, I learn every day, this science sometimes, even though I talk about it literally every day, day in and day out, sometimes it's still, as a parent, I separate myself as a psychologist and myself as a parent. It still feels like voodoo magic to me at the end of the day. And yet I have these experiences where I actually try it out and it works. And even sometimes I'm surprised. And so, don't be too hard on yourself. That this is hard to adapt and adopt as a practice as a parent. So this Halloween, so I have 3 kiddos, like I said. My youngest 2 are my daughter's now in school full-time in person, but she wasn't. But the 2 boys were. So they were live in school in person full time, and it was the Friday before Halloween. And so they were going to school in their costumes, right? Like kids do, like we've always done in the past. And my daughter that morning, she's the oldest, she's 7 now, was having just a behaviorally off morning. It was really, really difficult. And I did that thing as a parent was, gosh, Claire, what is wrong with you this morning? And we got in the car to go drop the boys off at school in their Halloween costumes, and Thriller, Michael Jackson's song Thriller, came on the radio. And she said, this is the song we do at school. And they do. So our little elementary school every year surprises the parents with the kids learn the whole Thriller dance and perform it for parents. And so she heard the song and said, this is the song that we do at school. And my psychologist brain finally kicked in, and I was like, she's upset that she's missing this Halloween experience that her brothers are getting. She knows deep down that that's not happening. And there's the behaviors, and yet they're, to make that connection so difficult sometimes because they're little, they can't, even teenagers sometimes can't identify those connections. Sometimes we as adults can't identify those connections. But then I said to her, Claire, are you upset about not going to school to do your Halloween experience? And she started to cry. And so it was the first time really that I had said something like that, and it matched, right? It connected with her. It made sense, and the behavior stopped that morning. And so me trying to redirect and correct the behaviors and doing all this stuff, none of that was effective until the two of us connected in a way that was, oh yeah, we've had this experience together in the past. It's not happening this year, and that's sad, and it's okay to be sad about that. And as soon as that connection happened, as soon as I addressed the distress that was happening, and helped her to kind of connect those thoughts, feelings, and emotions, and able to calm her fear brain, the behavior stopped. So again, sometimes it's not obvious, and we're not going to always be able to figure that out, but sometimes even just reflecting back to them in the moment, wow, it seems like you're really having a tough morning. Is there anything I can do to help? Can help them to kind of recognize what they're going through. Okay, so we're going to end tonight with this video on empathy from Brene Brown. For those of you who haven't heard me talk about her yet, I'm not sure how that's possible, but she's just an amazing person. She has a podcast, Unlocking Us, I believe it's called. I don't know why. I should know that because that's what I do to regulate as I listen to Brene Brown. She's incredibly brilliant, but she's also very grounded and real and just raw, and often just says exactly what I need to hear in the moment. And so this won't be the last we hear from Brene. She'll make appearances in the next couple nights together as well, but we're going to watch this video and hopefully end with this as a strategy. Oh, or not. Here we go.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
So hopefully tonight, this is what we've demonstrated. What makes something better is connection. It's not about the response. And if you're going to respond, it's to crawl down into that hole with that person and not judge them, right? Those 4 characteristics she says up front, I won't remember them all now, but non-judgmental, the ability to take their perspective as their truth, and recognize and reflect their emotional experience. And really, that is what we've been talking about tonight, is that emotional resonance, that ability to have that relationship with another and connect on that level of, having complete empathy and compassion for that person. And it's difficult. It's really, really difficult to have in the moment. I should say that video is readily available on YouTube if you would like to watch that again or kind of think about it again. So just some final notes, and this really is, it's a new slide for me. I'm always looking for more information, more research. And, today I was watching Dan Siegel, who's the author of that book, The Whole Brain Child and Brainstorm, do a TED Talk. And he was talking about, just this exact kind of concept we're talking about tonight, this relationship and using our relationship to co-regulate. And he was talking about his relationship with his son. It was just a really cool TED Talk to watch. But, and I'm constantly taking notes the whole time I'm watching it because I just can't wait to share this information. So, just some final notes to end on tonight. So compassion for others actually begins with compassion for ourselves. And why I wanted to highlight this point that he talked about in his TED Talk is because this is where it's kind of a teaser where we're going to go in the next session is, I'm asking you to have this incredibly ability to connect and redirect with your child and have this compassion and empathy. And really, we actually got to peel it back another layer in order to do that. I'm going to help us, kind of think about ways to take care of ourselves and regulate ourselves as parents, in order to be able to have the energy and a vulnerability really to be able to connect with our children. It's all about being aware of our emotions, and soothing them. So being aware of where we're at, having the ability to be self-reflective of, I'm having a really difficult day. I need to help myself calm down because I need to be available for others, and to not react and be reflective instead. Again, we're going to talk about that next time. And when we are vulnerable and present with our emotions, we are more able to be vulnerable and present for others and their emotions. And I just thought that was a beautiful way of kind of wrapping up what we've been talking about tonight, is really what I'm asking you to do, and why sometimes it's so hard to hear is I'm asking you to be vulnerable, and I'm asking you to not only be vulnerable with yourself, but with your children. And I think we find that to be really difficult as parents. And I'm including myself in that category. And, just that when we are able to be that vulnerable, that's when we're going to be able to manage and tolerate their emotions and what they're putting out into the world. We're able to crawl down. It's just another way of saying crawling down into that hole with them. So I'm gonna stop share for right now, see if there's any questions, if people want resources or have questions.
So thanks, Allison. That was really good. And,
Yeah.
Allison and I have been buddies through this whole process. It's great. I hear things. I did have a question in the chat.
Yes.
One mom and teacher was wondering about specific conditions or disabilities that might affect brain function. And, those kids kind of struggle to shift in and out of survival mode. And so did you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, so something that often comes up when I talk about mirror neurons is kiddos that are on the autism spectrum. So there is a lot of research happening right now that is one area of their brains that might function different than others. And so, I don't unfortunately have the end result answer for you, but that might might be part of what interferes with their ability to emotionally resonate with others, but that they're not present. They have mirror neurons, and so that the ability is there. And so that there might be different strategies that are involved for that. I'm trying to think of anything else that would have impact that area of the brain or help them get out of that stress or survival mode. With kiddos on the autism spectrum, they probably just need, just to have it done even lower and slower. That's why we have visual schedules, or we see them being far more rigid, or have a harder time having that mental flexibility or the ability to change quickly or adapt to different schedules. And so there's lots of strategies around managing that as well.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know if there are any other questions in the chat, but I think I know Stacia, who's one of our board members who's here, thought that every parent should have to watch this before they leave the hospital. And,
Yes.
I'm thinking I have 2 older teenage boys, and I some of this I feel like I do naturally, but some of it I really would have benefited from learning about when I was a young mother.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't look like there are any other questions, but Brendan did want to say a couple of words about something that's going on with Healthy Oxford Hills.
Yes, please.
While he's doing that, just to alert people, I did put a feedback form in the chat. So if you want to click on that and give us some feedback about tonight, I will send it out to people via email as well. And we will send out the recording. Or I think what I'll do is I'm going to password protect the recording, and I'll give you an opportunity to do that. But Brendan, what have you got for us this evening?
Yeah, thank you, Heather. And thank you, Dr. Roy.
Thanks.
This has been amazing. And the first week was also amazing. So like Stacia thinks that every parent should have to watch that video, I think that this conversation should be taking place in all sorts of different places. Like we should be talking about this with our church groups and with the other parents we're familiar with. And it just seems like, I believe this is an incredibly important topic, like addressing toxic stress and building resiliency for our kids. And we've been doing work around this for a couple of years. A lot of it involves showing documentaries of places around the county and then having discussions afterwards about what adverse childhood experiences are and how to build resilience. And we're wondering now, like, how do we get more people involved with the conversation? That course of action seems to have, like, I think we've done enough of that, and we're looking to take the next step. But we need ideas from community members about what's the best way to actually engage with other folks in the community around this conversation. So I'm looking for people just to help answer those questions. Like, how do we get more people involved in talking about these incredibly important things, like educating them and getting them talking about it. So if you're willing to kick some ideas around with me, please throw your email in the chat, or I put my email in the chat in that comment just now. It's brendan@healthyoxfordhills.org, and reach out to me so we can be part of a group to help answer those questions. Looking for just a better way to engage community, and I want that to be informed by community members instead of a bunch of us well-meaning people, 10 of us around a table thinking that we're going to solve that issue for the entire county. I want people around the county to be helping inform what that looks like. Thank you again, Heather, and thank you, Dr. Roy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks, Brendan. I think that's a great idea, and I can also send out your email address with the feedback form tomorrow. And for those of you that work in the district, just let me know if you need more information. So thank you, Dr. Roy. This was a great evening. It was, again, I can't get enough of this. It's good to watch over and over again, even for me. Yeah. I think I take away new things every time. So I hope those of you that were here tonight enjoyed the presentation, and I hope that you'll bring a friend next time. Our next session is in January. So
Yes.
I'm hoping after the holidays, people will have a few more people in attendance. It's kind of a nutty time right now, but we're going to record this and see if we can get some interaction that way.
Yes.
So.
And I might be biased, but the next session is my favorite. It's all about regulation, and it's a really good night. So hopefully we see all your faces again.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you. Happy holidays and be safe.
Happy holidays. Yeah.
Take care.
So they're thinking of adding COVID-19 as the 11th ACE.